Waverly Kingston, 32, never expected to uncover her family's darkest secret at her own birthday party. When her parents publicly called her the biggest disgrace to this family, she thought it was just their usual disappointment in her career choices. She had no idea that by the end of the night, she would discover a decades-old betrayal that would shatter her understanding of family loyalty forever, and that her response would change everyone's lives irrevocably. Hey everyone, before we dive deeper into this family revenge drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you enjoy real-life family drama with unexpected twists, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how Waverly deals with what happens next. Waverly Kingston had always been the outlier in the prestigious Kingston family. While her parents, Richard and Margaret Kingston, were respected figures in Oak Ridge Heights, a wealthy suburb of Boston, where old money mingled with new technology, Fortunes Waverly had chosen a path they considered beneath their family name. The Kingstons had established themselves as legal powerhouses 3 generations ago. Richard headed Kingston and Associates, a firm specializing in corporate law that catered to the city's elite. Margaret, though technically retired, still served on the boards of several charitable foundations, using her connections to maintain the family's social standing. Waverly's older sister, Elizabeth, had followed the expected path, becoming a corporate attorney at their father's firm. Married to James Harrington, heir to a banking fortune with 2 perfect children who attended the same private academy that generations of Kingstons had. Waverly, however, had broken tradition. After graduating with honors from Harvard Law like her ancestors, she shocked everyone by turning down a guaranteed partnership track at Kingston and Associates. Instead, she established a small practice focusing on immigrant rights and social justice cases, often working pro bono for clients who couldn't afford representation. A waste of a Kingston education, her father frequently remarked at family gatherings, not bothering to lower his voice. For years, Waverly had endured the subtle and not-so-subtle jabs about her career choices. The family's disappointment extended beyond her professional life into her personal choices as well. At 32, she remained unmarried, another failure in her parents' eyes. Her sister Elizabeth had been married by 26 and produced the first Kingston grandchild by 28, perfectly on schedule, according to Margaret Kingston's life timeline for her daughters. "You know, there are several associates at the firm who've asked about you," her mother would say during their mandatory Sunday brunches. "James has a cousin who just made partner at Blackwell and Reed. He's divorced, but it was very amicable. No children to complicate things." Waverly had learned to deflect these comments with practiced ease. "I'm dating my work right now, Mom. It's a committed relationship." Despite the tension, Waverly maintained the expected appearances. She attended the quarterly Kingston family gatherings, wore the appropriate designer labels to family functions, and kept her more radical political opinions to herself at her parents' dinner parties. She'd learned long ago that openly challenging the Kingston worldview only led to uncomfortable silences and later private lectures about family loyalty and reputation. What her family didn't know was how deeply fulfilled Waverly felt in her work. Her modest office in a converted warehouse near the courthouse had become more home to her than the elegant brownstone she'd grown up in. Her small team, Maria, a brilliant paralegal who had come through the immigration system herself, Devon, a recent law school graduate passionate about criminal justice reform, and Taylor, their office manager who kept everything running smoothly, had become the family she chose. Together, they had won a class action lawsuit against a local factory, exploiting undocumented workers, secured asylum for a family of political refugees, and established a legal clinic that offered free advice every Wednesday evening. Waverly's work made real differences in people's lives. something she couldn't say about her father's practice of helping corporations find tax loopholes and navigating regulatory gray areas. The week before her 32nd birthday, Waverly won a major case against a powerful property developer attempting to force low-income residents out of a building he wanted to convert into luxury condos. The victory had made local headlines with a photo of Waverly surrounded by the jubilant families whose homes she had saved. She hadn't expected her parents to acknowledge this accomplishment; they rarely did. But the morning after the news broke, she received a surprising call from her mother. "Darling, your father and I are hosting a dinner for your birthday this Saturday," Margaret announced in her characteristic no room for discussion tone. "Mom, that's really not necessary," Waverly replied, immediately suspicious. Her birthday gatherings were usually limited to brunch, with obligatory gifts of jewelry she never wore, or gift certificates to stores she never visited. Nonsense. 32 is an important year. The entire family will be there. Elizabeth and James are bringing the children, of course. Your cousin Blake is flying in from Chicago. Even your grandmother has agreed to attend. Waverly felt a knot forming in her stomach. Grandmother Kingston rarely left her estate these days, claiming that modern society exhausted her. Her presence elevated this from a standard family obligation to something more significant. "Is there something special about 32 that I'm missing?" Waverly asked cautiously. There was a pause on the line. "It's simply time for certain traditions to be observed," Margaret replied cryptically. "Wear the blue Chanel dress I bought you for Christmas. It brings out your eyes." The call ended before Waverly could press for more details, leaving her with an unsettled feeling. In the Kingston family, traditions usually involved either significant financial decisions or marriage arrangements, neither of which appealed to Waverly. That evening, she called Elizabeth, hoping her sister might provide some insight. "It's just a birthday dinner," Elizabeth said dismissively. Though Mother has been unusually involved in the planning, she's had the dining room rearranged twice and has been reviewing the family portfolios with Father. "Portfolios," Waverly echoed. "Why would my birthday dinner involve financial portfolios?" Elizabeth sighed. "You know how they are, Waverly. You're 32 now. In their minds, it's time you took on more responsibility in the family business. Dad's been talking about retirement more frequently." "I have a business," Waverly reminded her. "My practice is doing well. We just won the Riverside Heights case." "Yes, I saw that." Elizabeth replied, her tone careful. "Father saw it too. He wasn't pleased about you opposing Crestview Developments. Charles Whitney sits on the board and he's one of our biggest clients." The knot in Waverly's stomach tightened. Of course, her professional victory would be seen as a personal betrayal by her father. In the Kingston world, business connections always trumped moral considerations. "I was doing my job," she said firmly. I know that Elizabeth's voice softened slightly. "Just be prepared on Saturday. I think they have plans they want to discuss with you." As Waverly hung up, she gazed around her apartment, a spacious loft in a converted textile factory filled with books, colorful artwork from local artists, and souvenirs from her travels doing humanitarian legal work. Nothing about her life resembled the rigid, appearance-obsessed world of the Kingstons, and she had fought hard for this independence. Saturday would mark another battle in the ongoing war for her autonomy. But Waverly had no idea just how significant this particular skirmish would become. Saturday arrived with unseasonable rain that seemed fitting for Waverly's mood as she prepared for the evening ahead. She stared at the blue Chanel dress hanging on her closet door, a beautiful garment that represented everything she resisted about her family's expectations. After a moment's hesitation, she pushed it aside and selected a tailored burgundy pantsuit instead. Small rebellions were sometimes all she had. The Kingston estate stood imposingly at the end of a tree-lined driveway in Oak Ridge Heights, its Georgian architecture a testament to old wealth and conservative values. As Waverly's rideshare approached, she noted additional cars in the circular driveway, more than would be expected for a simple family birthday dinner. Pausing beneath the portico, she took a steadying breath before ringing the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal Henderson, the family butler who had known Waverly since childhood. "Miss Kingston," he greeted her with a slight bow. Was there a hint of sympathy in his eyes? "Your family awaits in the main drawing room." "More than family, it seems," Waverly observed, nodding toward the collection of coats on the antique hall tree. Henderson lowered his voice. "Several of your father's associates have joined the celebration. Business associates at a family birthday dinner, another warning sign." Squaring her shoulders, Waverly handed Henderson her rain-specked coat and made her way to the drawing room. The conversation dimmed noticeably as she entered. About 20 people stood in elegant clusters around the room, champagne flutes in hand. Waverly immediately spotted her father deep in conversation with Charles Whitney of Crestview Developments, the very man whose company she had defeated in court days earlier. Her mother was entertaining a group of society women near the fireplace, while Elizabeth and James circulated with practiced social grace. Margaret Kingston broke away from her group when she spotted her younger daughter. Her smile tightened as she took in Waverly's outfit. "I see you decided against the Chanel," she said, by way of greeting air-kissing Waverly's cheeks. "The pantsuit seemed more appropriate for the weather," Waverly replied evenly. Well, you're here now. Let me introduce you to some people." For the next half hour, Waverly was paraded around like a show pony, exchanging pleasantries with her parents' friends and business associates. Several made pointed comments about her recent court victory, thinly veiling their disapproval with strained smiles. "Quite the crusader, aren't you?" remarked Philip Thornton, a senior partner at a rival law firm, though one wonders if targeting respectable businesses is the best use of a Kingston law degree. Before Waverly could respond, her father appeared at her side, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Waverly has always had her idealistic phase," Richard said with a tight smile, "but we're hoping for more mature decisions in her future." The presumption in his statement made Waverly's blood boil, but years of Kingston training kept her expression neutral. "My work brings me great satisfaction, actually," she replied calmly. Richard's grip on her shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's not discuss business tonight. It's a celebration, after all." He steered her away toward another group, leaving Waverly seething inwardly. By the time dinner was announced, Waverly had consumed 3 glasses of champagne. Not nearly enough to dull the irritation she felt, but sufficient to embolden her. As they moved to the formal dining room, she was surprised to find elaborate place cards arranging the seating. Hers was at the center of the table, directly opposite her grandmother, Virginia Kingston, an imperious woman in her 80s who rarely left her own wing of the estate these days. Virginia Kingston had been the family matriarch since her husband's death 15 years ago. Though she had officially passed control of the family business to Richard, everyone knew she still wielded considerable influence over both the company and the family's social standing. The elderly woman acknowledged Waverly with a curt nod. "You've caused quite a stir with that case of yours," she said, without preamble, as servants began serving the first course. "The law was on our side," Grandmother Waverly replied. "The law," Virginia scoffed. "The Kingstons have always understood that the law is malleable in the hands of those who know how to shape it. Your grandfather built this family's legacy on that principle." Waverly felt a familiar surge of rebellion. Perhaps that legacy needs updating. A hush fell over the nearby conversations. Virginia's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on another person. "You always were the difficult one," she remarked, turning her attention to her soup. Throughout the elaborate 5-course meal, Waverly felt increasingly like the main exhibit at a peculiar zoo. Conversations flowed around her, but often stopped when she tried to participate. Elizabeth shot her occasional sympathetic glances from across the table, while her parents maintained a stream of banal small talk that carefully avoided any mention of Waverley's actual life or accomplishments. It wasn't until dessert, an elaborate birthday cake that Waverley hadn't been consulted on, that the purpose of the gathering began to emerge. Richard Kingston stood tapping his crystal glass for attention. "I want to thank everyone for joining us to celebrate Waverley's 32nd birthday," he began, his practiced public speaking voice filling the room. "As many of you know, 32 is a significant age in the Kingston family tradition. It marks the time when we formally recognize the next generation's place in our legacy." Waverley tensed. This was news to her. "When I turned 32, Richard continued, my father presented me with my first seat on the Kingston Holdings board. When Elizabeth reached this milestone 2 years ago, she took her place as head of our family's charitable foundation." He turned his gaze to Waverley, his expression a carefully constructed mask of paternal pride that didn't reach his eyes. "Tonight, we recognize Waverley's place in our family's future." Margaret joined her husband bearing a small velvet box. "The Kingston women have passed this down for generations," she said, opening it to reveal an antique sapphire ring. "Each daughter receives it on her 32nd birthday, symbolizing her commitment to upholding the family's values and traditions." The implication was clear. The ring came with strings attached. Very specific strings that would bind Waverley to the path her family had always intended for her. Richard continued. "We're also pleased to announce that Waverley will be joining Kingston and Associates as head of our newly established Community Relations Division, working closely with our valued clients like Crestview to develop their charitable initiatives." Waverley sat frozen as applause broke out around the table. The position was a transparent attempt to neutralize her, to put her social justice interests to work for the very corporations she had been fighting against. It was a gilded cage, beautifully constructed to appear as an honor, while effectively ending her independent practice and co-opting her reputation for their corporate benefit. Worst of all, they had announced it as a fait accompli without ever discussing it with her. As the applause died down, all eyes turned to Waverley, expectantly waiting for her gracious acceptance of both the ring and the role that had been thrust upon her. The silence stretched as Waverley stared at the sapphire ring in its velvet nest. The stone caught the light from the chandelier, throwing blue reflections across the pristine white tablecloth. She was acutely aware of every eye in the room fixed upon her, waiting for her to perform her part in this carefully orchestrated family pageant. Her mother stepped toward her, ring extended. "Waverley, darling," she prompted, her smile tight at the edges. "Isn't it beautiful? It belonged to your great-grandmother." Waverley finally found her voice. "You didn't think to discuss any of this with me first," the question hung in the air. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while James suddenly became very interested in his dessert fork. Richard cleared his throat. "There's nothing to discuss. This is the Kingston way. You've had your time to explore other interests. Now it's time to take your proper place in the family." "My proper place," Waverley repeated, each word deliberate. "And what if my proper place is exactly where I've chosen to be, running my own practice, representing clients who actually need help?" A ripple of murmurs circulated around the table. Charles Whitney exchanged glances with another business associate, eyebrows raised in evident disapproval. "This is hardly the venue for this conversation," Margaret hissed, her smile now completely artificial. "Take the ring, Waverley." Waverley stood slowly, placing her napkin beside her half-eaten cake. "No, Mother. I won't take the ring. And I won't be joining Kingston and Associates in any capacity." Richard's face flushed dark red. "You've always been difficult, Waverley, but this is beyond acceptable. Do you have any idea the strings I pulled to create this position for you? The arrangements I've made with our clients? Arrangements you made without my knowledge or consent," Waverley replied. her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I'm not a chess piece you can move around your corporate board, Father." Virginia Kingston tapped her cane against the polished hardwood floor. "Richard, Margaret, perhaps this discussion should continue in private." But Richard was too far gone in his anger to heed his mother's advice. Years of simmering disappointment in his younger daughter boiled over. "This is exactly why we needed to intervene," he said, addressing the table at large. "Waverly has consistently demonstrated poor judgment and a disturbing lack of family loyalty." Richard Elizabeth interjected, "Perhaps we should." "No, Elizabeth. It's time things were said plainly." Richard turned back to Waverly. "Your little social justice crusade has been an embarrassment to this family. Do you have any idea how it looks when a Kingston is publicly opposing the very businesses that have supported our firm for generations? The clients you've antagonized with your misguided idealism are the same people who put you through Harvard." Waverly's calm began to crack. "Those clients are exploiting vulnerable people for profit. The Riverside Heights case was a direct attack on Charles, who sits on our board," Richard interrupted, gesturing to Whitney. "Your grandfather would be appalled at your behavior." Margaret stepped in, her voice artificially soothing. "What your father means, Waverly, is that there are ways to effect change without burning bridges. This new position would allow you to influence corporate policy from within." "It would neutralize me," Waverly corrected. "It would put a Kingston-approved leash on my work and use my reputation to give cover to the very companies I've been fighting." A tense silence followed this blunt assessment. Virginia Kingston's voice cut through the tension. "The girl isn't wrong, Richard." All eyes turned to the family matriarch in surprise. "She sees the trap for what it is," Virginia continued, an unexpected note of approval in her voice. "At least she has that much Kingston in her." Richard's face contorted with frustration. "Mother, you, of all people, understand the importance of family unity. Grandfather built this legacy for all of us to uphold. Howard built the legacy." Virginia agreed, but he never intended for blind obedience to be its cornerstone. This unexpected support from her grandmother momentarily threw Waverly off balance. Virginia Kingston had always been the most traditional, the most insistent on proper appearances. This deviation from the expected script sent ripples of confusion around the table. Richard, however, was too invested in his plan to back down now. "This is about more than tradition. This is about duty, something Waverly has consistently failed to understand." "My duty is to my clients and my principals," Waverly countered. "Your duty is to this family." Richard's voice rose sharply. "A family that has given you every advantage, every opportunity, and what have you done with it? You've thrown it back in our faces at every turn. Your radical politics, your inappropriate associations, your refusal to settle down with someone suitable." Richard, Margaret cautioned, glancing nervously at their guests. "No, Margaret. I'm done pretending." Richard turned to address the entire table. "For years, we've made excuses for Waverly's behavior. We've told ourselves it was just a phase, that eventually she would grow up and accept her responsibilities. But the truth is, she has become the biggest disgrace to this family in 3 generations." The words landed like physical blows. Waverly had endured years of subtle, undermining, passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled disappointment, but never such a direct public repudiation. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the servants had frozen in place, dessert plates half cleared. Elizabeth stared at her father in shock, while James examined his wine glass with intense focus. Margaret's perfect posture had collapsed slightly, as if the weight of the public spectacle was physically pressing her down. Charles Whitney cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should give the family some privacy." "No need," Waverly said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the emotions churning inside her. I was just leaving. She moved to depart, but paused beside her father's chair. You know what the real disgrace is, Father? That the Kingston legacy you're so desperate to protect was built by exploiting others. That this family's wealth comes at the expense of people who couldn't fight back. Until me. Richard's face paled. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? What about the Blackwater settlement in '97? The one grandfather hushed up after your firm represented that chemical company that poisoned an entire neighborhood. Or the indigenous lands that mysteriously ended up rezoned for Kingston Holdings development. Her father's shocked expression confirmed she'd hit a nerve. Somewhere in her research for other cases, Waverly had uncovered threads of Kingston involvement in various questionable dealings, but she'd never had confirmation until seeing her father's reaction now. You're talking about ancient history you don't understand, Richard said, but his voice had lost its authoritative edge. No, I'm talking about a pattern, Waverly replied. One I refuse to become part of. She turned to the assembled guests. I apologize for the dramatics. It seems my birthday celebration has turned into something else entirely. With that, she walked out of the dining room, her steps quickening as she passed through the grand foyer. Henderson appeared silently with her coat, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes communicating unspoken support. Miss Kingston, he murmured as he helped her with her coat, some battles are worth the scars they leave. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the night air was heavy with moisture. Waverly paused on the steps, the magnitude of what had just transpired washing over her. She had not just rejected the ring and position she had publicly broken with her family in front of Boston's elite social circle. By tomorrow, it would be the talk of their entire community. As she waited for her rideshare, Elizabeth hurried out the front door. Waverly, wait, she called, clutching a small package. You forgot this. One of the actual birthday gifts. Waverly accepted it numbly. Thanks. Elizabeth hesitated, glancing back at the house. What you said in there, about Blackwater and the indigenous lands, is it true I've seen documents Waverly admitted? Nothing that would stand up in court but enough to make me ask questions. Her sister looked troubled. I never knew. Would it have changed anything if you had Elizabeth didn't answer directly? They went too far tonight, she said instead. Father should never have ambushed you like that, especially not publicly. But you knew, Waverly realized. You knew about their plans. Elizabeth had the grace to look ashamed. They told me last week. I should have warned you more clearly. Waverly's rideshare pulled into the driveway, its headlights illuminating the sisters in harsh white light. I have to go, Waverly said. Elizabeth surprised her by pulling her into a tight hug. Be careful, she whispered. Father won't let this go easily. As Waverly settled into the back seat of the car, she glanced down at the small wrapped package in her hands. The card read simply, From Grandmother. Curious, she carefully unwrapped it to find an ornate key with the Kingston family crest, and a folded note that read, Storage Unit #7 Kingston Holdings Basement. Some truths should see daylight. Come alone. Waverly stared at the key, her mind racing with possibilities. What secrets could be hidden in a family storage unit that even her iron-willed grandmother thought should be revealed? The Kingston Holdings building stood in downtown Boston, a 12-story Art Deco masterpiece that had been in the family since the 1942. During business hours, it housed the law firm, various family business interests, and leased office space. But at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, the building was nearly deserted. Waverly had debated waiting until morning, but the confrontation at dinner had left her too agitated for sleep. The mysterious key and her grandmother's cryptic note pulled at her with an urgency she couldn't ignore. Whatever Virginia Kingston wanted her to find it was clearly important enough to risk Richard's wrath. The night security guard recognized Waverly immediately. "Evening, Miss Kingston. Burning the midnight oil. Just picking up some files I need for a case," she replied, with a practiced ease that came from years of Kingston training. The ability to lie smoothly was practically a family birthright. "You know the way down to the archives?" he asked, signing her in. "I do, thanks, Carl." The basement level of Kingston Holdings was a maze of climate-controlled document storage, old furniture from various office renovations, and a section of private storage units for family members. Waverly had rarely ventured down here, having little reason to access the family archives after leaving the firm. Her phone flashlight illuminated the numbered doors until she found Unit #7. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and the heavy door swung open to reveal a surprisingly small space no larger than a walk-in closet. Inside stood a single filing cabinet and a dusty banker's box labeled HK. Personal in faded marker. Waverly pulled the chain for the overhead light and began with the filing cabinet. The top drawer contained what appeared to be standard legal documents, property deeds, insurance policies, and investment records dating back decades. Nothing seemed particularly revelatory until she noticed something odd: several properties listed under a trust name she didn't recognize. Blackwater Recovery Trust. The Blackwater reference immediately connected to her earlier accusation about the settlement her grandfather had supposedly orchestrated. She'd discovered vague references to it while researching environmental justice cases, but details had been scarce. The second drawer held personal correspondence letters between her grandfather Howard Kingston and various business associates spanning the 1,960 seconds through the 1,990 seconds. Many were mundane, but a file labeled Whitney Correspondence caught her attention. Charles Whitney Sr., the father of the current Crestview CEO, had apparently been deeply involved with Howard Kingston in a series of land development deals. As Waverly skimmed the letters, a disturbing pattern emerged. The men had systematically purchased land around a small manufacturing facility outside Boston, apparently aware through insider information that the factory was leaking chemicals into the groundwater. Rather than reporting the contamination, they bought the increasingly devalued properties as families fell ill and moved away. Once they controlled the entire area, they used Kingston legal connections to force a modest settlement that limited the company's liability, while allowing Whitney to redevelop the land after minimal cleanup. The entire Blackwater neighborhood had essentially been sacrificed for profit, with her grandfather orchestrating the legal maneuvers that kept the true extent of the contamination hidden from the public and the courts. Waverly felt physically ill as she read the coldly calculated letters. Her suspicions had been correct, but the reality was far worse than she'd imagined. This wasn't just unethical business, it was a conspiracy that had likely resulted in serious health consequences for dozens of families. But the banker's box proved even more disturbing. Inside, she found a sealed manila envelope with Virginia open, only in emergency, written in her grandfather's handwriting. The seal had been broken, suggesting her grandmother had already viewed the contents. The envelope contained adoption papers for a baby girl dated 35 years earlier, along with a birth certificate for Margaret Elizabeth Townsend. Her mother's maiden name had been Carson, not Townsend, and a series of canceled checks to something called New Horizons Adoption Services. Accompanying these documents was a handwritten letter from Howard to Virginia. "My dearest Virginia, if you're reading this, circumstances have forced these truths into the open. I have carried this burden alone to protect you and our family name. When Richard married Margaret, I conducted my usual background investigation, as I would for any Kingston marriage. What I discovered was deeply troubling. Margaret's biological mother was Maria Diaz, a cleaning woman who worked at the Carson household. She became pregnant by Margaret's father, Joseph Carson, who paid to place the baby with a childless couple from his church, the Townsends, and fabricated the story that Margaret was distantly related to his wife's family. The truth of Margaret's parentage, that she is half Hispanic and born of an affair between Joseph Carson and their domestic help, would have been scandalous enough. But in further investigating the Carsons' background, I discovered something that threatened the entire Kingston legacy. Joseph Carson's real name was Joseph Castellano. He changed it after fleeing New York to escape prosecution for embezzlement. The financial empire he built in Boston, which so impressed us when Richard became engaged to Margaret, was founded on stolen money and subsequent fraudulent dealings. I made the decision to protect our family by helping conceal these facts. The Blackwater situation provided leverage to ensure Carson's continued discretion. In exchange for our legal assistance with his environmental problems, he signed over controlling interest in Carson Industries to Kingston Holdings through offshore entities that cannot be easily traced. I have never told Richard the truth about his wife's background or her father's crimes. I believed this deception was necessary to preserve the Kingston name and Richard's happiness. If circumstances have forced you to open this letter, you must use your judgment about how much to reveal. Some secrets are best taken to the grave, while others must eventually face the light of day. With deepest regrets for the burdens I place upon you, Howard Waverly sank to the floor, the letter trembling in her hands. Her mother, the paragon of Boston Brahmin society, the woman who had spent decades perfecting her WASP image and connections, was actually the illegitimate daughter of a Hispanic household employee and a criminal who had stolen his fortune. The hypocrisy was staggering. Her entire life, Waverly had been judged against impossible standards of proper Kingston behavior by parents whose own history was built on fraud and deception. The family legacy they had wielded like a weapon against her choices was founded on exploitation, criminal activity, and racial prejudice. Her grandmother's motivation for sharing this information now became clearer. Virginia Kingston had known all along about Margaret's true parentage and the corrupt foundation of the Carson fortune that had merged with Kingston wealth. Yet she had maintained the facade for decades, upholding the family mythology. Why reveal it now? Was it simply that Waverly's confrontation at dinner had finally prompted her grandmother to acknowledge the hypocrisy? Or was there something more strategic at play? As Waverly carefully replaced the documents, her legal mind began calculating the implications. These papers represented power leverage against her father's public humiliation and attempt to force her into the family business. But using them would destroy her mother and potentially implicate her grandmother in decades of deception. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on Waverly's shoulders as she locked the storage unit and headed back to the elevator. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you find what you were looking for? We should talk. Meet me at the Harbor View Hotel bar. V." Her grandmother was waiting for her, it seemed. And apparently the night's revelations were not yet complete. Hey everyone, I hope you're as shocked as I am right now. This family drama just keeps getting deeper, doesn't it? If you're enjoying this wild ride through Waverly's discoveries, hit that like button and subscribe to make sure you don't miss what happens next. I'm dying to hear what you think might be coming. Will Waverly confront her parents with what she's found? What could her grandmother possibly want to discuss? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Now let's find out what Virginia has to say. The Harbor View Hotel was one of Boston's oldest luxury establishments, a favorite of the city's elite for discreet meetings and quiet conversations away from prying eyes. At midnight, its wood-paneled bar was sparsely populated, a few business travelers nursing nightcaps, a couple celebrating a special occasion in the corner. Virginia Kingston sat at a private booth in the back, a glass of scotch before her. At 84, she still cut an imposing figure, spine-straight silver hair impeccably styled, her trademark pearls gleaming against a black cashmere sweater. She showed no surprise at Waverly's disheveled appearance, or the obvious signs that she'd been crying. Scotch Virginia offered as Waverly slid into the booth opposite her. Please. Virginia signaled the bartender, who promptly delivered another tumbler of amber liquid. For a moment, the two women sat in silence. 3 generations of Kingston women reduced to 2 united by devastating secrets. You read everything, Virginia finally said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Waverly took a long sip of her drink, welcoming the burning sensation. How long have you known about Margaret? Since before she married your father. Howard told me after he completed his investigation. And you allowed the marriage. Virginia's thin lips curved into a humorless smile. Allowed, I encouraged it. The Carson fortune was substantial even if its origins were questionable. The match benefited the family. The family, Waverly echoed bitterly. Always the family. Yes, Virginia agreed unapologetically. The Kingston name has been my life's work to protect and enhance, just as it was Howard's before me, and his father's before him. By any means necessary, it seems, including blackmail, environmental crimes, and covering up fraud, Waverly said, unable to keep the disgust from her voice. Virginia regarded her granddaughter steadily. The world you practice law in today is very different from the one Howard navigated, or even the one Richard came of age in. Certain accommodations were considered necessary. Necessary, Waverly's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. Grandmother people were poisoned at Blackwater. Real people with families. I'm not here to defend those actions, Virginia said, surprising Waverly. Howard made decisions I wasn't always privy to. The Blackwater situation. She paused, taking a deliberate sip of scotch. Even he had regrets about how that was handled. Waverly leaned forward. Then why show me all this now? Why expose the family secrets you've spent a lifetime protecting? Virginia's eyes, the same deep blue as Waverly's own, sharpened with a sudden intensity. Because Richard has forgotten what the Kingston legacy truly means. He sees only power and prestige, not responsibility. He would use you as a public relations prop while continuing the very practices you oppose. And you wouldn't, I'm dying, Waverly. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Pancreatic cancer, Virginia continued matter-of-factly. 6 months, perhaps less. I've made my peace with it. Waverly's anger deflated slightly. I'm sorry. Does father know? No one knows except my doctor, and now you. Virginia waved away any sympathy. I've had a long life, longer than many deserve. But it has focused my thoughts on what happens to the Kingston name after I'm gone. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a slim folder. Richard was telling the truth about one thing tonight. 32 is indeed significant in our family tradition. It's when control begins to transfer to the next generation. She slid the folder across the table. Your grandfather established a complex trust structure for the family holdings. Richard controls the majority now, with Elizabeth gaining her portion when she turned 32. Yours has been held in escrow, awaiting your formal acceptance into the family business. Waverly opened the folder to find legal documents detailing her ownership stake in Kingston Holdings, a substantial portion that, combined with Elizabeth's share, would constitute a controlling interest. You want me to take over the family business? Waverly asked incredulously. Virginia gave a short, dry laugh. Hardly. You'd hate it, and you lack Richard's ruthless streak. But I do want you to use your legal mind and your ownership position to reform it. Waverly stared at her grandmother in disbelief. You're proposing a hostile takeover. I'm proposing a course correction, Virginia countered. The documents you found tonight provide leverage. Richard's entire worldview is built on the Kingston legacy of respectability. Learning that his wife is the illegitimate daughter of a Hispanic maid and a fugitive fraudster would devastate him, not because he wouldn't love Margaret, but because it undermines the narrative he's built his identity around. You're suggesting I blackmail my own father, using information that would destroy my mother. Virginia's gaze was unflinching. I'm suggesting you use every tool at your disposal to force change in a system that needs changing. Isn't that what your legal practice is about? Fighting powerful interests who exploit the vulnerable. Waverly shook her head in amazement. All these years I thought you disapproved of my work the most. I disapproved of your naivety, Virginia corrected. Your belief that righteous anger alone could change entrenched systems. Real change requires leverage, strategy, and occasionally unpleasant choices. She tapped a manicured finger on the folder. These documents transfer control of my voting shares to you effective immediately. Combined with your trust portion, you'll have significant influence, though not yet control. Why me and not Elizabeth? Elizabeth is brilliant and kind, but she's too deeply embedded in the system to reform it. You stand outside, which gives you perspective she lacks. Virginia's expression softened slightly. Besides, she has children to consider. The fallout from what must be done would affect them too directly. Waverly's mind raced with possibilities and complications. What exactly are you proposing I do? First, establish your position of strength. Richard needs to understand you have both the leverage of these secrets and the legal authority of your ownership stake. Virginia outlined her strategy with the precision of a military general. Then propose reforms, a fund for Blackwater victims, environmental remediation for past projects, ethical guidelines for future work. He'll fight it. Of course he will, Virginia agreed. Which is why the second phase involves bringing Elizabeth to our side. With her shares aligned with yours, Richard would be outvoted. Waverly considered the implications. And if he threatens to expose the plan go public, he won't, Virginia said with certainty. The Kingston name means too much to him. He'll negotiate rather than risk public scandal. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. In a single night, Waverly had gone from family outcast to potential power broker armed with secrets that could reshape the entire Kingston legacy. Why now? She asked finally. You've known these secrets for decades. You could have used this leverage yourself. Virginia was silent for a long moment, staring into her scotch, as if divining answers from its depths. When you reach the end of your life, Waverly priorities shift. Legacy becomes more than just a name or a fortune, it's the mark you leave on the world. She looked up, her eyes surprisingly vulnerable. I've upheld traditions that perhaps should have been questioned. I've protected secrets that allowed harm to continue. I can't undo those choices, but I can give you the power to make different ones. The bartender appeared, asking if they wanted another round. Virginia declined with a slight shake of her head. Think about it, she told Waverly as she gathered her things. You have until Monday morning. That's when Richard will begin damage control from tonight's scene, likely starting with dissolving your trust portion as punishment for your defiance. She stood leaning slightly on an ebony cane. Whatever you decide, the key to the storage unit is yours now. Those records are your insurance policy. Waverly remained seated, overwhelmed by the weight of decision before her. Grandmother, she called as Virginia began to walk away. Did you ever regret it? Keeping these secrets all these years? Virginia paused, considering the question with genuine reflection. Regret is a luxury, Waverly. We make choices and live with their consequences. But she added quietly, I've often wondered who I might have been without the burden of those secrets. With that, she made her way out of the bar, leaving Waverly alone with an empty scotch glass and a folder that represented both tremendous power and terrible responsibility. Sunday passed in a blur as Waverly sequestered herself in her apartment, ignoring calls from her mother and messages from Elizabeth. She needed space to think, to plan, to decide whether she was willing to follow the course her grandmother had laid out. By evening, she had made photocopies of the most damning documents and secured them in her office. Safe studied the trust agreements until her eyes burned and drafted multiple approaches for confronting her father. None seemed quite right, either too aggressive or too conciliatory. Around 8, her doorbell rang. She peered through the peephole to find Elizabeth standing in the hallway looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "I've been calling you all day," Elizabeth said when Waverly opened the door. "Are you okay after last night?" "I'm fine," Waverly replied, stepping aside to let her sister enter. "Just needed some time to process." Elizabeth glanced around the apartment at the legal documents spread across the dining table. The half-empty coffee cups, the notepad covered in Waverly's handwriting. "This doesn't look like processing. This looks like preparing for war." Waverly smiled grimly. "Perceptive as always, Liz." Father's furious Elizabeth reported sinking onto the couch. "He's been in meetings with the board members all day, laying groundwork to have your trust portion redirected to the family foundation, effectively disinheriting you." This confirmed Virginia's warning. Can he do that legally? Elizabeth herself, a skilled corporate attorney, frowned. "There are provisions in the trust for conduct unbecoming a Kingston. It's vague enough that with the right judge he might succeed." She studied her sister's face. "But you don't seem surprised." "I'm not," Waverly admitted after a moment's hesitation. She had to decide how much to reveal to Elizabeth. Her sister had always been caught in the middle, sympathetic to Waverly's ideals but unwilling to risk her own comfortable position in the family hierarchy. "I met with grandmother last night," she said finally. "She shared some information with me about our family, about mother." Elizabeth's eyebrows shot up. "Grandmother. She barely leaves her wing of the estate these days." "She's dying," Waverly said bluntly. "Pancreatic cancer." Elizabeth paled. "My God! Does father know?" "No. She only told me." Waverly took a deep breath. "Liz, what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about our family." Over the next hour, Waverly carefully revealed what she had discovered: the Blackwater cover-up, their mother's true parentage, the fraudulent origins of the Carson fortune that had merged with Kingston wealth. She held back only the details of Virginia's proposed takeover, watching Elizabeth's reactions carefully. Her sister moved from disbelief to shock to a quiet, simmering anger. "All these years," Elizabeth said, when Waverly finished. "All the lectures about propriety and family honor. The pressure to be perfect Kingston women. And it was built on lies. Not just lies," Waverly emphasized. "People were hurt, Liz. Real people with real lives. The Blackwater families developed cancers, birth defects, consequences they're still living with, while grandfather and Whitney profited from their suffering." Elizabeth was silent for a long moment, absently twisting her wedding ring, a family heirloom from James's side. "What do you plan to do with this information?" It was the crucial question. Waverly studied her sister's face, trying to gauge where her loyalties would ultimately lie. "I haven't decided yet," she hedged, "but I can't ignore it. Not when our father is using the same playbook, exploiting the vulnerable while preaching about legacy and tradition." Elizabeth stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. "James sits on the Kingston Holdings board," she said quietly. "If this became public, it would affect him too. And our children." "I know." Elizabeth turned back to face her. There must be a way to force change without destroying everything. It was the opening Waverly had been waiting for. Actually, there might be. She explained Virginia's proposal, using their combined shares to force reforms from within, leveraging the secrets as insurance rather than weapons. As she outlined the strategy, she saw something shift in Elizabeth's expression, the careful corporate attorney evaluating angles, calculating risks and benefits. "It could work," Elizabeth said slowly. With my shares and yours, plus grandmother's proxy, we'd have effective control of the board. We could implement new policies, establish a victims fund for Blackwater, redirect resources toward environmental remediation. We could transform the Kingston legacy into something to be genuinely proud of. Waverly agreed, hope flickering for the first time. But it would mean standing against father. Are you prepared for that? Elizabeth's expression hardened with resolve that reminded Waverly of their grandmother. He called you a disgrace to this family. He tried to force you into a position that would compromise everything you believe in. And all these years he's perpetuated grandfather's corrupt practices while holding us to impossible standards. She straightened her shoulders. Yes, I'm prepared to stand against that. The sisters stayed up late into the night refining their strategy. Elizabeth's corporate expertise complemented Waverly's litigation experience, allowing them to anticipate Richard's likely countermoves and prepare responses. By dawn, they had a comprehensive plan. Elizabeth would secure her husband's support and neutralize potential opposition on the board. Waverly would prepare legal documents establishing the Blackwater Remediation Trust and draft new ethical guidelines for Kingston Holdings. Together, they would confront Richard with both the leverage of the family secrets and their combined voting control. As morning light filled the apartment, Elizabeth hugged Waverly tightly. "I've always admired your courage," she said, "even when I was too afraid to show it." "And I've always admired your strategic mind," Waverly replied. "We make a good team when we're not being pitted against each other." That was always his tactic, wasn't it? Keeping us competing for his approval instead of supporting each other? Waverly nodded. Classic divide and conquer. Elizabeth gathered her things, preparing to return home before her absence raised questions. At the door, she paused. "Do you think Mother knows about her real parents?" "I don't know," Waverly admitted. "Either she's been living with that knowledge her entire life, or she's a victim of the deception too. Either way, it's heartbreaking," Elizabeth finished. After Elizabeth left, Waverly showered and changed into her most professional attire, a charcoal suit she reserved for her most important court appearances. Today would require every ounce of poise and conviction she possessed. She called her office manager to cancel her Monday appointments, then texted her father, "We need to talk. Your office, 10 a.m. It concerns grandmother and the future of Kingston Holdings." Richard's reply came almost immediately. "I'll clear my schedule." As Waverly gathered the documents she would need for the confrontation, her phone chimed with another message, this one from Virginia. "Whatever happens today, remember that true strength lies in knowing when to use power and when to show mercy. Both are part of a legacy worth preserving." With those words echoing in her mind, Waverly prepared to face her father and redefine what it meant to be a Kingston. 1 year later, Waverly stood at the podium in Riverside Park, formerly known as Blackwater, addressing the families gathered for the opening of the Kingston Whitney Memorial Health Clinic. Beside her stood Elizabeth, now co-chair of Kingston Holdings, and across the crowd she spotted her parents. The journey hadn't been easy. Richard had fought, threatened, and finally negotiated. Margaret had weathered the truth of her origins with surprising resilience. Virginia had lived just long enough to see the beginning of change. As Waverly cut the ribbon, she finally understood the true Kingston legacy wasn't wealth or status. It was making things right. What's your own experience with family karma or justice in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of family secrets, betrayal, and ultimately redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories like this one. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late to stand up for what's right, even against your own family. Thank you all for watching. And remember, sometimes the strongest family bonds are the ones we choose to rebuild after they've been broken. Until next time.